Hello everyone, this is JUNGKOOK. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I wasn't sure if I should tell this story at all, because even now, saying his name brings back feelings I spent a long time trying to hide. There was a time when JIMIN was the person I could talk to about almost anything, the person who could make me laugh when I didn't feel like smiling, and somehow, without either of us realizing it, our friendship became something much harder for me to explain. I started noticing the little things. The way I would look for him when I entered a room. The way his messages could completely change my mood. The way I remembered things he had said weeks before, even when I pretended they didn't matter. But there was one problem. I was afraid that if I admitted what was happening inside my heart, I might lose him completely. So I stayed quiet. I smiled when I wanted to say something else. I walked away when I wanted to stay. And then one day I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting what we had anymore. It was slowly destroying it. I thought I still had time to fix everything. But then JIMIN told me something I never expected to hear. And suddenly I was standing in front of the person I cared about most, knowing that I might have to say goodbye. The worst part? He still didn't know the real reason I was letting him go. I think the hardest part about telling this story is knowing that there wasn't one dramatic moment when everything changed between JIMIN and me. It happened slowly, so slowly that I didn't even notice it at first. In the beginning, JIMIN was simply someone I trusted, someone I could joke with after a long day, someone I could sit beside without feeling like I had to fill every silence. We had known each other through so many ordinary moments that I started taking his presence for granted. If I walked into a room and saw him there, I felt comfortable. If I had something funny happen during the day, he was one of the first people I wanted to tell. And if something was bothering me, somehow he always noticed before I said anything. I remember one evening after a long schedule when most people had already left the room. I was sitting there looking at my phone pretending to be busy when JIMIN walked over and dropped into the seat beside me. He looked exhausted, but he still smiled. "You okay?" he asked. I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." He looked at me for a few seconds and laughed quietly. "You always say that when you're not fine." I remember smiling because he was right. "Then stop asking," I joked. He shook his head. "No, I'll keep asking." It was such a small conversation, probably nothing special to him, but I remembered it. I remembered the way he said it like my answer actually mattered. After that, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. I noticed when he was tired. I noticed when he was unusually quiet. I noticed when he smiled for real and when he was only smiling because other people were around. And somehow, without meaning to, I began looking for him whenever I entered a room. Sometimes I would catch myself doing it and quickly look somewhere else, almost embarrassed by my own behavior. I told myself it was normal. We were close. Of course I would notice him. At least that's what I kept telling myself. There were nights when we'd stay up talking long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Sometimes we'd talk about serious things, but most of the time it was nothing important. Music, food, something funny that happened during the day, random memories, plans we weren't even sure we'd ever make. And I liked those conversations more than I wanted to admit. One night he asked me, "What do you think you'll do when everything finally becomes quiet?" I didn't understand the question at first. "Quiet?" I asked. He nodded. "No schedules, no cameras, no people telling you where you have to be, just you." I thought about it for a moment. I could have given him some simple answer, but instead I said, "I think I'd want to be somewhere with people I feel comfortable around." He looked at me and smiled. That's it, you don't want anything else?" I laughed. "Maybe." He waited. "What?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nothing." I still remember that moment because I almost asked him what he meant. Almost. But I didn't. That became a pattern between us. There were so many moments when I could have asked one more question, stayed 5 more minutes, or said something honest, but I always stopped myself. I didn't know why. Maybe I was afraid of making something simple complicated. Maybe I was afraid that if I looked too closely at what I felt, I wouldn't be able to pretend it was nothing anymore. And then something happened that made me realize JIMIN had become more important to me than I wanted to admit. I had received some good news one afternoon, and before I even had time to think about it, I reached for my phone. I wanted to tell him first. Not RM, not Jin, not Suga, not anyone else, him. My thumb was already hovering over his name when I stopped. I stared at the screen for a few seconds and wondered why him? I didn't have an answer, so I sent the message anyway. He replied almost immediately, "I'm happy for you. I knew you could do it." I read those words several times. It was such a simple message, but I smiled at my phone like an idiot. And that's when I began to understand that something inside me had changed. I wasn't just looking for Jimin anymore. I was looking for his reaction to things, his approval, his smile, his presence. I wanted him to know the good things happening in my life, and when something went wrong, I wanted to hear his voice. I didn't know what to call that feeling yet. I only knew that it scared me a little, because once someone becomes that important to you, losing them becomes your biggest fear. And I didn't realize it then, but that fear was going to make me make the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't understand my own feelings right away. I tried to convince myself that what I felt for Jimin was just the kind of closeness that happens when you've shared so many years, so many difficult days, and so many memories with someone. I told myself I was simply protective of him. I told myself I cared because he was important to me. But then I started noticing how differently I reacted when it came to him. One evening, we were all together after a long day, and Jimin was talking to someone near the other side of the room. I wasn't even part of their conversation, but I kept looking over without realizing it. He laughed at something the other person said, and for some reason, I felt a strange discomfort in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even exactly jealousy. It was more confusing than that. I just didn't like seeing him so comfortable with someone else. I looked away and tried to focus on my phone, but a few seconds later, I looked again. I caught myself and thought, what am I doing? I had no right to feel that way. Jimin hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply being himself. So I forced myself to stop watching. A few minutes later, Jimin came over and sat beside me like nothing had happened. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm tired." "You sure?" I nodded. He studied my face for a moment. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing? Pretending you're okay." I laughed softly. "Maybe you're just imagining things." He smiled. "Maybe." Then he leaned back and started talking about something completely random, and somehow the strange feeling disappeared. That's what confused me most. He could make me feel better without even trying. Sometimes I wondered if he understood how much influence he had over my mood. I don't think he did. At least, I hoped he didn't, because I wasn't ready for him to know. A few days later, we ended up talking late at night again. The room was quiet, and the only light came from the phone in my hand. Jimin was lying back, staring at the ceiling. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he suddenly asked. I turned toward him. "Leaving what?" "Everything." I was quiet. He continued, "Not forever, just starting somewhere else, a different life." I asked him, "Would you really do that?" He didn't answer immediately. I don't know. That answer stayed with me. I wanted to ask him if there was someone he wanted to follow. I wanted to ask if there was something he wasn't telling me. But again, I stayed quiet. Instead, I said, "Wherever you go, you'll be okay." He turned his head toward me. "How do you know?" I smiled. "Because you're Jimin." He laughed. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got." He smiled, but then his expression changed slightly. "Would you miss me?" I thought he was joking. I laughed. "Of course." "A lot?" I looked at him. For a second, neither of us said anything. I wanted to say, "More than you know." Instead, I said, "Yeah, a lot." He looked away first. "Good." I still don't know what he meant by that. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a question he asked without thinking, but I carried it with me. From that point on, I became more aware of every little change between us. If he didn't message me, I noticed. If he seemed distant, I wondered why. If he looked tired, I wanted to ask if something was wrong. And when he was happy, I felt happy too. That was when I finally admitted something to myself. I cared about him in a way I couldn't explain anymore. But admitting it to myself was one thing. Admitting it to him was completely different. I was terrified. Because what if he didn't feel the same? What if I told him the truth and he looked at me differently afterward? What if the friendship we had built so carefully suddenly became awkward? I couldn't risk that. So I made a decision that seemed safe at the time. I would keep my feelings to myself. I thought silence would protect us. I thought if I never said anything, nothing would change. I was wrong. Because feelings don't disappear just because you refuse to speak about them. They find other ways to show themselves. And mine started showing in the worst possible way. I became distant. I answered his messages later than usual. Sometimes I made excuses when he asked me to stay. I thought I was giving myself space to figure things out. But Jimin didn't know that. From his side, all he could see was me pulling away. One night, he finally asked me, "Did I do something?" I froze. "What?" He looked directly at me. "You've been different lately." I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say, "No, you didn't do anything. The problem is me. The problem is that I care about you too much, and I don't know what to do with that feeling." But instead, I looked away and said the worst possible thing. "Nothing's wrong." Jimin nodded slowly, but I could see that he didn't believe me. "Okay," he said quietly. Then he walked away. I watched him leave, knowing I had just hurt the person I was desperately trying not to lose. And that was the moment I should have stopped hiding. But I didn't. I had no idea that my silence was about to create a misunderstanding neither of us knew how to fix. After that night, something changed between Jimin and me. It wasn't obvious at first. We still talked. We still laughed when everyone was together. We still acted like everything was normal. But I could feel the difference. There was a distance that hadn't been there before, and I knew I had created it. The strange thing was that I wanted to fix it, but every time I had the chance, I became afraid again. I would pick up my phone, open our conversation, type something, and then delete it. Sometimes I would write, "Can we talk?" and stare at those words for several minutes before deciding it was better not to send them. I didn't know how to explain something I barely understood myself. One afternoon, Jimin walked into the room while I was talking with the others. He smiled at everyone, but when his eyes met mine, the smile disappeared for just a second. I noticed it. Of course I noticed it. I wanted to call him over, but I stayed quiet. Later that evening, I found him alone in the hallway. He was looking at his phone, and for a moment I thought about walking past him. Instead, I stopped. "Jimin." He looked up. "Yeah? Can we talk?" He put his phone away. "Sure." We stood there for a few seconds without saying anything. I had imagined this conversation so many times, but when the moment finally came, I couldn't find the words. He noticed my hesitation. "What is it?" he asked. I took a breath. I just wanted to say I stopped. He waited. "Sorry if I've been weird lately." He looked at me carefully. "You've been more than weird." I almost laughed, but his expression told me he wasn't joking. "I know." He crossed his arms. "Did I do something? No." "Then why are you avoiding me?" That question hit harder than I expected. I looked down. "I'm not avoiding you." He gave me a tired smile. "You are." I didn't know what to say. He continued. "Every time I try to get close, you find a reason to leave." I wanted to tell him the truth right there. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't leaving because I didn't care. I was leaving because I cared too much. But fear won again. I've just had a lot on my mind. He nodded slowly. "Okay." There was something in his voice that made me feel terrible. He wasn't angry. He sounded disappointed. Somehow that was worse. "Jimin?" I started, but he shook his head. "It's fine. You don't have to explain." Then he walked away. I stood there watching him disappear around the corner, and I knew I had failed again. A few days passed. Our conversations became shorter. He stopped sending me random messages. He stopped asking if I wanted to eat with him. He stopped waiting for me after schedules. Those things might sound small, but I felt every single one of them. One night, I opened my phone and realized I had been staring at our last conversation for almost 10 minutes. There was nothing special about it. Just a simple message from him asking if I had eaten. I had answered with one word, "Yeah." Looking at it now, I hated myself for that answer. I wanted to send another message, something honest. Instead, I locked my phone. I thought maybe giving him space was the right thing. I didn't realize he was starting to believe that I wanted him gone. Then came the misunderstanding. It happened so simply that I still can't believe how much damage it caused. I had been told that Jimin was meeting someone after a schedule. I didn't think much about it until I saw him outside, standing with another person and talking seriously. They looked close. I couldn't hear what they were saying. I only saw Jimin smiling, then becoming serious, then listening carefully. Something inside me dropped. I knew I shouldn't assume anything. I knew that. But my mind immediately started creating explanations. Maybe there was someone else. Maybe that's why he had become distant. Maybe he had realized that I wasn't important to him anymore. I stood there for a moment, hidden from their view, and then I walked away. I didn't ask him who the person was. I didn't give him the chance to explain. I simply let my fear decide what the truth was. That night, Jimin sent me a message. "Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at it. My heart started beating faster. I typed about what? He replied, something important. I almost called him immediately. Instead, I waited. Then I saw another message appear. Actually, forget it. I felt my stomach drop. I called him, but he didn't answer. I called again, nothing. I wanted to go to him, but I stopped myself. I told myself that if he wanted to talk, he would call. The next morning, I learned that he had made a decision that was going to change everything. He had been offered an opportunity that would take him away for a while. And because of the distance between us, he hadn't known how to tell me. I found out from someone else before I heard it from him. I remember standing there, staring at the floor, thinking about all the moments I had wasted. All those times I could have simply said what I felt. All those messages I had deleted. All those conversations I had avoided. And then my phone rang. It was Jimin. I answered immediately. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, I think I need to tell you something. My heart sank because I already knew what was coming. But what he said next wasn't what I expected. He told me he was leaving. And then he said something that made me realize the misunderstanding between us was much deeper than I had imagined. When Jimin told me he was leaving, I didn't know what to say. I had imagined so many possible conversations between us, but never that one. He told me about the opportunity, the schedule, the distance, and how long he might be gone. I listened quietly, even though inside I felt like everything was moving too fast. When are you leaving? I finally asked. There was a pause. Soon. That one word stayed in my head. Soon. I wanted to ask him why he hadn't told me earlier. But then I remembered that I had been the one pushing him away. Maybe he thought I didn't care. Maybe he thought my silence meant I was ready to let him go. Are you happy about it? I asked. He took a breath. I don't know. You don't know? I wanted the opportunity. But now that it's actually happening, he stopped. I don't know. I closed my eyes for a moment. I wanted to tell him not to go, but I knew that wasn't fair. This was something important to him, and I couldn't ask him to give it up because I was too afraid to admit my feelings. So I said the only thing I could think of. You should go. There was silence on the other end. You really think so? Yeah. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. You should take the chance. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, okay. I could hear something different in his voice. I'll see you later. The call ended. I sat there staring at my phone. I had just told the person I loved to leave. And somehow I knew I had done exactly what I had been afraid of. I was losing him because I had spent so long trying not to lose him. That evening, I found Jimin in a quiet room. He was packing a few things into a bag. When he saw me, he smiled. Hey. I stood there awkwardly. You're really leaving? He nodded. Yeah. I looked at the bag. When did you decide? A while ago. I swallowed. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at me for a moment. Would you have wanted me to? That question hurt. Of course. He looked down. I wasn't sure anymore. I didn't know how to respond. He continued folding his clothes. You haven't exactly made me feel like you wanted me around. I felt my chest tighten. That's not true. He stopped. Then what is it? I looked at him. This was it. I could tell him. I could finally say everything. But the words wouldn't come. He waited for me. JUNGKOOK? I shook my head. I'm just glad you're going. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. His face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to know I had hurt him. Right, he said quietly. He went back to packing. I wanted to take the words back. I wanted to tell him I didn't mean them, but I stood there in silence. A few minutes later, he closed the bag. I'll see you before I leave. I nodded. Okay. He walked past me, and for the first time, I wondered if that might be the last time we would ever have a normal conversation. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head. The first time he asked if I was okay, the late night conversations, the messages, the way he always noticed when something was wrong. The question he once asked me, would you miss me? I finally understood why that question had stayed with me. Maybe he had been trying to understand how much he mattered to me, and I had never given him an honest answer. The next morning, RM noticed that something was wrong. He looked at me and asked, did you talk to Jimin? I nodded. He's leaving. RM was quiet for a moment. Are you okay with that? I almost laughed. No. He looked at me. Then why are you letting him go? I didn't answer. RM sighed. You know, sometimes protecting someone isn't the same as letting them go. I looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, if you're scared of losing him, don't make the decision for him. Those words stayed with me. I realized I had been doing exactly that. I had decided what was best for Jimin without ever asking what he wanted. I had assumed that telling him to leave would protect our friendship. But the truth was, I was protecting myself from rejection. Later that day, I found out that Jimin had been meeting the person I had seen him with earlier. It wasn't someone he was dating. It was someone helping him with the opportunity he had been offered. They had been discussing the details of his departure. That was it. I had spent days feeling jealous over something that wasn't even what I thought it was. I felt embarrassed, but more than that, I felt angry at myself. I had created an entire story in my head because I was too afraid to ask him the truth. I immediately called him, no answer. I sent a message. Can we talk? Nothing. Another hour passed. Still nothing. Then finally, my phone lit up. It was Jimin. His message was short. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I stared at those words. Tomorrow morning. Suddenly, all the time I thought I had disappeared. I didn't care about looking foolish anymore. I didn't care if he didn't feel the same. I only knew that I couldn't let him leave without telling him the truth. I grabbed my jacket and walked out. But when I reached the place where I thought I would find him, he wasn't there. Then I received one more message. Maybe saying goodbye is easier this way. I froze, because I knew exactly what he meant. And for the first time, I realized that Jimin wasn't the only one afraid of goodbye. I was the reason he believed goodbye was what I wanted. I stood there staring at Jimin's message for what felt like forever. Maybe saying goodbye is easier this way. I read it again and again, hoping I had misunderstood him somehow. But I hadn't. He really believed that saying goodbye was easier for me. He believed I had already accepted losing him. And that realization hurt more than anything else. Because the truth was the complete opposite. I didn't want to say goodbye. I had never wanted to lose him. I had just been too afraid to tell him how much he meant to me. I called him again. This time he answered. Jimin. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Where are you? There was a pause. Why? Because I need to see you. He didn't respond. Please. Another silence. Then he finally told me where he was. I didn't waste another second. When I arrived, I saw him standing alone near the entrance, holding his bag. He looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. Like he had already spent too much time trying to understand me. When he saw me, he didn't smile. You came. Of course I came. He looked away. I thought you said you were glad I was leaving. I took a breath. I lied. He looked back at me. Why? I didn't have a good answer that could make everything disappear. So I finally decided to tell him the truth. Because I was scared. He stayed quiet. Scared of what? He asked. I looked at him and realized there was no way to say this without changing everything. Of losing you. His expression softened slightly, but he still looked confused. You were already losing me. That sentence broke something inside me. I know. I swallowed hard, and I'm sorry. He looked down at his bag. I don't understand you. I know. One day you're close to me, and the next day you act like you don't want me around. I know. Then I tell you I'm leaving, and you tell me to go. I closed my eyes for a second. I know. He shook his head. Then why are you here? I looked at him. Because I finally realized that being silent wasn't protecting you. It wasn't protecting me. It was just hurting both of us. He didn't say anything. So I continued. I need to tell you something, and I don't know what happens after I say it. His eyes met mine. Then say it. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it. You're the first person I look for when I walk into a room. He didn't move. You're the person I want to tell when something good happens. When something bad happens, you're the person I want to hear from. When you're quiet, I notice. When you're happy, I feel better. And when I thought you might be with someone else, I stopped. I got jealous. He looked surprised. I didn't want to admit that. I took another breath. I kept telling myself it was just because we were close. But it wasn't. It hasn't been for a long time. Jimin looked away and I suddenly became afraid again. This was the moment I had imagined so many times, and now that it was happening, I wanted to take it all back. Jimin, he interrupted me softly. Why didn't you tell me? I looked down. Because I was afraid. You already said that. I know, but I don't think you understand how afraid I was. He waited. I was afraid that if you didn't feel the same, I would lose you. And if you did feel the same, everything between us would change anyway. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he asked, so you thought saying nothing would keep everything the same? I nodded. Yes. He gave a small, sad laugh. It didn't. I know. He looked at me. You hurt me. Those words were hard to hear, but I knew I deserved them. I know. I thought you didn't care anymore. My throat tightened. I cared too much. He looked down. That's what made you run away? Yes. He was silent again. Then he asked something I never expected. Do you remember when I asked if you would miss me? I nodded slowly. I remember. I wasn't asking because I was bored. I looked at him. Then why? He hesitated. Because I wanted to know if I mattered to you. I couldn't speak. He continued. And when you said you would miss me, I believed you. But then you started pushing me away, and I thought maybe I had misunderstood everything. I felt my eyes burn. You didn't misunderstand everything. He looked at me. Then what did I misunderstand? I took a slow breath. You misunderstood my silence. For the first time, his expression changed. He looked less angry and more emotional. I thought you wanted me to leave. I never wanted that. Then why did you tell me to go? Because I thought loving someone sometimes meant letting them choose their own life. He stared at me. And maybe that's true, but I should have been honest first. We stood there quietly. Neither of us knew what to say next. Then Jimin looked at the time. I still have to leave tomorrow. My heart sank. I know. Nothing has changed about that. I nodded. I know. He looked at me carefully. So what exactly are you asking me to do? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't ask him to stay. I couldn't ask him to abandon something important. All I could do was tell him the truth. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you not to leave believing that you weren't important to me. His eyes became wet. He looked away quickly. You really waited until the last minute to tell me this. I laughed softly through the emotion. I know, I'm terrible at this. He smiled for the first time in days. It was small, but it was enough to make my chest ache. Then he said something that made me realize the goodbye wasn't going to be as simple as I thought. JUNGKOOK, there's something I haven't told you either. I remember the way Jimin looked at me after saying those words. There's something I haven't told you either. For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe normally. I had spent so long believing I was the only one hiding something. And suddenly I realized that maybe I had been wrong about more than I knew. What is it? I asked. Jimin looked down at the floor. I don't know how to say it. I almost smiled because that sounded exactly like something I would say. You can say it however you want. He shook his head. That's easy for you to say now. I deserve that. So I stayed quiet. He took a slow breath and finally looked at me. I wasn't going to tell you about the opportunity at first because I thought you wouldn't care. My heart tightened. Why would you think that? He gave me a tired look. Because of how you've been acting. I nodded. That's fair. He continued. But that wasn't the only reason. I waited. I was also afraid. Afraid of what? He hesitated before answering. That if I stayed close to you, I'd make things harder for myself. I didn't understand. What do you mean? He looked at me for a long moment. Because I have feelings for you too. Everything around me seemed to become quiet. I had imagined hearing those words so many times, but nothing prepared me for the moment they actually came from him. I didn't know what expression was on my face. I just stared at him. Jimin, he looked away. Don't make me say it again. I let out a nervous laugh. I'm not. Good. He smiled faintly. Because I almost didn't tell you. I stepped closer but stopped before getting too close. I didn't want to assume anything. When did you know? I asked. He thought for a moment. I don't know exactly. He looked at me. Maybe before you did. I laughed softly. That sounds impossible. It isn't. Then why didn't you tell me? He raised an eyebrow. Do you really want me to answer that? I smiled. Okay, fair. For a moment, the tension between us became lighter. But then I remembered that he was still leaving the next morning. The happiness I had just felt was immediately mixed with fear. So what happens now? I asked. Jimin didn't answer right away. I don't know. Those 3 words frightened me more than anything else. I had spent so long thinking that knowing we felt the same would solve everything. But it didn't. Love didn't suddenly remove the distance, the opportunity, the uncertainty, or the mistakes we had made. If anything, it made everything feel more important. Are you still going? I asked. He nodded. Yes. I looked down. Okay. Are you disappointed? Of course I am. He smiled sadly. At least you're honest now. I'm trying. We stood there for a while, neither of us wanting to end the conversation. Eventually, Jimin asked, Do you regret coming here? I looked at him. No. Even if nothing changes. I took a breath. Something already changed. He waited. You know how I feel now, and I know how you feel. That's not nothing. He smiled. You're right. That night, we talked longer than we had in weeks. We talked about everything we had been too afraid to say. He told me that when I started avoiding him, he thought I was tired of him. I told him that every time I walked away, I wanted to turn around. He admitted that the person I had seen him with was helping arrange the opportunity, and nothing romantic had been happening. I admitted that I had been jealous and ashamed of it. We laughed about how ridiculous our assumptions had become. Then we became quiet again. At one point, Jimin asked, "If you had told me earlier, do you think things would have been different?" I thought about it carefully. Maybe. That's not very convincing. I smiled. Okay, yes, I think they would have been different. He nodded. Me too. There was a long silence. Then he said, "But maybe we needed to make these mistakes." I looked at him. Why? Because now we know what silence can do. I didn't answer. He was right. We had both been protecting ourselves so carefully that we almost lost each other. Before we separated that night, Jimin handed me something. It was a small folded piece of paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Don't open it now." I looked at him suspiciously. Why? Because I said so. I laughed. That's not an explanation. You'll understand later. I put it carefully into my pocket. Okay. He started walking away, then stopped and looked back. "JUNGKOOK. Yeah? I'm still leaving tomorrow." I nodded. "I know, but I'm not saying goodbye." My heart skipped. "What?" He smiled. "I'm saying see you later." I smiled back. Okay. He disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing there with a strange feeling in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't terrified of losing him. I was terrified of something else. I was terrified of how much I wanted this to work. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I reached into my pocket and found the folded paper Jimin had given me. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally opened it. There were only a few words written inside, but those words changed the way I understood everything that had happened between us. I unfolded the paper slowly because, honestly, I was nervous about what I was going to find. It was just a small piece of paper, folded twice, with Jimin's handwriting on it. There wasn't a long message, there wasn't anything dramatic. Just one sentence. "I was waiting for you to stop being afraid." I read it once, then again, and again. I sat there for a long time with the paper in my hands, thinking about how simple those words were and how much they explained. He had been waiting. Maybe not for me to become perfect. Maybe not for me to suddenly understand everything. He had just been waiting for me to be honest. I put the paper carefully into my wallet and immediately called him. He answered after a few rings. "You're awake." "How did you know?" "Because I knew you'd read it." I smiled. "You really planned this." "Maybe." I sat back. "Jimin." "Yeah, thank you." There was a pause. "For what?" "For waiting." He became quiet. Then he said, "I didn't wait forever." That sentence reminded me that I couldn't take his feelings for granted. He had his own life, his own plans, and his own limits. Loving someone didn't mean assuming they would always be there whenever I finally became brave enough. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm going to do this differently." "Do what differently?" "Use." He didn't answer immediately. "JUNGKOOK, I'm not asking you to promise me anything." I took a breath. "I'm asking if we can try, slowly, honestly, no pretending. No disappearing when we're scared. No making decisions for each other." I heard him laugh softly. "You practiced that speech, didn't you?" I laughed too, a little. I knew it. "So?" I asked. "Can we try?" He was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Yes." That one word made me smile so hard that I had to look away even though nobody was there to see me. But the happiness didn't last long. His departure was still real. Later that morning, I went to see him before he left. The others were around, so we couldn't talk about everything. We acted normal, joked around, and pretended the previous night hadn't changed anything. But every time our eyes met, I knew we were both thinking about it. At one point, Jimin walked past me and quietly said, "Don't forget." I knew exactly what he meant. Don't forget what we said. Don't forget what we felt. Don't go back to being afraid. When it was finally time for him to leave, I walked with him as far as I could. Neither of us said much. There were too many people around and too many things happening at once. Eventually, we stopped. Jimin looked at me. "Take care of yourself." I smiled. "You too." He hesitated. "Call me." "I will. Even when you're busy. Especially when I'm busy." He smiled. Then he turned to leave. I watched him walk away, and for a moment that old fear came back. The fear that distance would change everything. The fear that we would slowly stop talking. The fear that one day I'd look at my phone and realize the person I had been waiting for wasn't going to message me anymore. But this time, I didn't let fear control me. I took out my phone and sent him a message before he even reached the door. "I already miss you." A few seconds later, my phone vibrated. "Good. Now you know how I felt. I laughed quietly. It was such a small exchange, but it felt like a new beginning. The first few days were easier than I expected. We talked almost every night, sometimes for hours, sometimes only for a few minutes. But we kept our promise. We didn't pretend. If I missed him, I said it. If he was tired, he said it. If something bothered me, I didn't disappear, I told him. And slowly, I began to understand that the relationship wasn't built on never having problems. It was built on not running away whenever problems appeared. There were still difficult days. There were times when our schedules didn't match. There were nights when one of us was too exhausted to talk. There were moments when I wondered whether the distance would eventually become too much. But whenever that fear appeared, I remembered the note in my wallet. I was waiting for you to stop being afraid. That sentence became something I carried with me. Months passed, and Jimin began sending me pictures from wherever he was. Nothing special. A cup of coffee, a street he liked, a meal he thought I'd enjoy. Sometimes he'd send a picture without any explanation. I would know exactly what he meant. I thought you'd like this. I did the same. I'd send him pictures from my day, and we'd laugh about the smallest things. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One night, during one of our calls, Jimin suddenly asked, "Do you remember the first time you realized you liked me?" I laughed. "I don't think I ever told you." "Exactly. Why do you want to know?" "Because I want to hear it from you." I thought for a moment. "I think it was the day I got good news and reached for my phone to tell you first." He became quiet. "Really?" "Yeah." "Why didn't you tell me then?" I laughed because I didn't understand what it meant. He smiled. "And now?" I looked at the screen, even though he couldn't see my face clearly. "Now I understand." "What?" I smiled. "That you became important to me before I was brave enough to admit it." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I think that's when I knew too." My heart skipped. "When?" "The day you told me you would miss me." I remembered that conversation immediately. "That's why you asked?" "Yeah." "And when I said yes?" He laughed softly. I went to bed smiling. I couldn't help laughing. "You never told me that. You never asked." We stayed on the call for a long time after that. Neither of us wanted to hang up. But eventually, he became quiet. "JUNGKOOK? Yeah? There's something I need to tell you." His voice sounded different, more serious. I sat up. "What happened?" He hesitated. "I got another offer." My smile disappeared. "Another offer?" "Yeah." I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, and this one would mean being away even longer. I didn't know what to say. This time, however, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. I wasn't going to tell him what he should choose, just because I was afraid of losing him. But I also knew that this decision could change everything between us again. And when Jimin finally told me where the opportunity was taking him, I realized our first goodbye had only been the beginning. When Jimin told me where the new opportunity would take him, I went completely quiet. It wasn't because I was angry. It was because I knew exactly what this meant. More distance, more missed calls, more nights when I would want to hear his voice, but wouldn't know if he was awake. And this time, I couldn't pretend that I was okay with it. But I also couldn't make the mistake I had made before. I couldn't tell him what to choose simply because I was scared. "How long?" I finally asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "Maybe several months." I looked down at my hands. "Do you want to go?" He didn't answer immediately. "I think I do." I nodded. "Then you should." There was a long silence. "You're sure?" he asked. I smiled a little. "I'm scared. I'm not sure. But I don't want my fear to become your reason to stay." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he whispered, "You've changed." I laughed softly. Maybe I finally learned something. "What?" "That loving someone doesn't mean holding them in place." He was quiet. "And it doesn't mean pretending you don't care." Exactly. That conversation wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest conversations we'd ever had. But it was honest. And honesty made everything feel different. Over the next few weeks, we tried to prepare ourselves for another period of distance. This time, we didn't know what would happen. We didn't make unrealistic promises. We simply promised to communicate. If we were scared, we'd say it. If we were hurt, we'd say it. If we missed each other, we'd say it. I think that was the most important promise we ever made. A few days before he left, Jimin asked me to meet him somewhere quiet. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting with 2 cups of coffee. "You remembered my order," I said. He smiled. "I always remember." I sat down beside him. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just drank our coffee and watched people passing by. Eventually, he said, Do you remember when you told me you were glad I was leaving? I groaned. Please don't remind me. He laughed. I'm serious. I know. I'm sorry. He shook his head. I don't want you to apologize anymore. I looked at him. Why? Because you finally told me the truth. I smiled. Still, I wish I had said it sooner. Me too. He looked down at his coffee. Maybe we would have saved ourselves a lot of pain. Probably. Then he smiled, but maybe we wouldn't appreciate this as much. I looked at him. Maybe. There was something peaceful about that moment. We weren't pretending everything would be easy. We weren't pretending distance wouldn't hurt. We simply knew what we felt now. And somehow that was enough to make me less afraid. Before we left, Jimin gave me another small piece of paper. I looked at him suspiciously. Another note? He laughed. Don't open it yet. You really like doing this, maybe. I put it into my wallet beside the first one. Fine. He stood up. Come here. I looked at him, surprised. He opened his arms and I hugged him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some perfect movie moment. It was just two people holding on a little longer than usual because we both knew we were going to miss each other. When we finally stepped apart, Jimin looked at me and said, "Don't disappear." I smiled. "I won't." "Promise?" "Promise." He left a few days later. This time saying goodbye still hurt, but it wasn't the same. I didn't feel like I was losing him. I felt like I was trusting him. There were difficult moments after he left. Sometimes we'd go several days without a proper conversation. Sometimes one of us would misunderstand a message. Sometimes I would stare at my phone and wonder whether I was becoming too dependent on hearing from him. But I didn't hide those feelings anymore. One night I called him and said, "I miss you." He laughed softly. "I know. How do you know?" "Because you said it 3 times today." I laughed. "Did I?" "Yes." "Then I really miss you." "I miss you too." Those simple words were enough. Months went by. I kept the notes in my wallet. I carried them everywhere. They became a reminder of how easily fear could make me push away someone I loved. And then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I received a message from Jimin. It wasn't his usual message. There was no joke, no picture, no simple "Did you eat?" It only said, "Can you come here?" I stared at the screen. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. I sent another message. "Is everything okay?" Nothing. For the next hour, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind started imagining every possible problem. Finally, my phone rang. It was Jimin. "Hey," I said quickly, "what's going on?" He was quiet. Then he said, "I need you to trust me." My heart started beating faster. "I do." "Then don't ask too many questions." I laughed nervously. "That's not very reassuring." "I know." He took a breath. "Just come." I looked at the message again. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know why he sounded so serious. But I knew I was going. And when I arrived, I saw something waiting for me that I never expected. Jimin was standing there holding a small envelope. He looked nervous. Almost as nervous as I had been the first time I tried to tell him how I felt. He held the envelope toward me and said, "This time, I want you to open it now." I took it from his hand, and when I opened it, I finally understood why he had asked me to come. I opened the envelope slowly, almost afraid of what I would find inside. There was a photograph, a small key, and another handwritten note. I picked up the photograph first. It was a picture of the two of us from months earlier, from one of those ordinary days I had almost forgotten about. We weren't posing, we weren't even looking at the camera. We were sitting beside each other, laughing about something neither of us could probably remember anymore. I stared at it for a few seconds before looking at Jimin. "Where did you get this?" He smiled. "I took it." "You took this?" "Yeah," I laughed softly. "I didn't even know." "I know." Then I looked at the note. My hands were already shaking a little. I unfolded it and read the first line. "You once told me you were afraid that telling me the truth would change everything." I looked up at him. He nodded for me to keep reading. "You were right. It did change everything, but not in the way you feared." I swallowed hard. Then I continued. "Before I met you, I thought love was supposed to make everything certain. But with you, I learned that sometimes love means being honest, even when you don't know what happens next." I stopped reading for a moment. My eyes were already getting wet. "Jimin." He looked away. "Keep going," I continued. "I'm not asking you to promise that nothing will ever change. I'm not asking you to wait for me forever. I'm asking you to keep choosing honesty with me, even when it's difficult." I looked at the small key in my hand. I had no idea what it was for. The final line of the note said, "And this time, I'm not saying goodbye." I looked at him. "What is this?" He smiled. "You'll see." He walked toward a door nearby and unlocked it with another key. Then he opened it and stepped aside. Inside was a small room, nothing extravagant, just a quiet space with a couch, a table, 2 chairs, and several photographs pinned to the wall. I walked inside slowly. There were pictures of places we had talked about visiting, a cafe, a street, a small restaurant, a view from a city we had once joked about seeing together. There were also little notes attached to some of them. You said you wanted to try this. You said this place looked peaceful. You promised you'd show me this one day. I looked at him. You remembered all of this? He nodded. I remembered everything. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I had been afraid that I was the only one paying attention to the small things. I was wrong. Jimin had been remembering too. Why did you make this? I asked. He smiled. Because I wanted somewhere we could come back to. I looked around the room again. Come back to? Whenever we're in the same place. My chest tightened. You really thought about this? A lot. I walked toward one of the photographs. It was from a conversation we'd had months earlier about a place I wanted to visit. I had completely forgotten mentioning it. He hadn't. I turned back to him. You know this is dangerous, right? He laughed. What? You're making it impossible for me not to love you more. He smiled. Maybe that's the point. I laughed, and for a moment, all the fear disappeared. We sat together on the couch and talked for hours. We talked about the past, the mistakes, the distance, and what we wanted from the future. Nothing was guaranteed. We both knew that. But we had finally learned how to talk instead of guessing. Before I left, Jimin took the first note from my wallet and read it again. I was waiting for you to stop being afraid. He smiled. You finally did. I looked at him. I think I'm still afraid. He nodded. Me too. Then what's different? He thought for a moment. We're afraid together now. That sentence stayed with me. I think that's when I finally understood what love meant to me. It wasn't about never being afraid. It wasn't about knowing exactly what would happen. It was about finding someone who made you willing to face uncertainty instead of running away from it. A few weeks later, Jimin had to leave again. This time, I didn't tell myself that goodbye meant losing him. I simply hugged him and said, come back when you can. He smiled. I will. Then he whispered, and don't forget me. I laughed. I couldn't if I tried. He walked away, and I watched until he disappeared from sight. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, but this time it wasn't mixed with regret. I had said what I needed to say. He knew. I knew. Whatever happened next, we wouldn't have to wonder anymore. Still, there was one thing I hadn't told Jimin. There was something I had been planning for a long time, something I had kept completely secret, because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just another emotional decision. I wanted to be certain. And when the right moment finally came, I knew I couldn't hide it anymore. Because this time, I wasn't preparing to say goodbye to Jimin. I was preparing to ask him to stay. I had spent so much time thinking about goodbye that I almost forgot something important. Sometimes when you love someone, you don't just have to find the courage to tell them how you feel. You also have to find the courage to ask them what they want. I didn't want to decide Jimin's future for him again. I didn't want to ask him to stay simply because I was afraid of being alone. So I waited until I knew exactly what I was asking. When Jimin finally returned, I didn't tell him about my plan immediately. I wanted to see him first without expectations. When I saw him walk through the door, I smiled before I even realized it. He looked tired, but the moment he saw me, his face changed. You came. I laughed. Of course I came. He walked toward me, and for a few seconds we just stood there. Then he hugged me. I missed you. I missed you too. This time there was no hesitation, no pretending, no trying to hide behind jokes. We had already said the things we were afraid to say. That made everything feel different. Later that evening, I took him to the small room he had prepared for us. The lights were warm and the photographs were still on the wall. He looked around and smiled. You kept it. Of course. I walked toward the table and placed something on it. Jimin looked at me. What's that? Something for you. He opened the small box. Inside was a simple bracelet. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic. Just something I had chosen because I knew he would actually wear it. He touched it carefully. You bought this for me? Yeah, why? I smiled. Because I wanted you to have something that reminds you that you're not doing this alone. He looked at me for a long moment. JUNGKOOK? Wait. I took a breath. There's more. He laughed nervously. You're making me nervous. I'm nervous too. I sat down across from him. I've thought about this for a long time. And I don't want you to answer because you feel sorry for me, because you think you owe me something, or because you're afraid I'll be hurt." He became serious. "Okay." I looked at him. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." He nodded. "Go ahead." My heart was beating so hard that I almost lost my words. "Do you want to stay?" He stared at me. I quickly continued. "Not because I asked you. Not because of me. I mean, after everything you've experienced, after everything you've wanted to do, what do you want?" He looked down at his hands. For a long time he didn't answer. And strangely, I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. I had learned that silence didn't always mean rejection. Sometimes people simply needed time to find the truth. Finally, he looked up. "I don't know." I nodded. "That's okay. You really mean that?" "Yeah." He looked surprised. "You're not going to tell me what I should do?" I smiled. "No. I already made that mistake once." He laughed softly. "You really did." Then his expression became serious again. "But I do know one thing." "What?" He reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't want to keep saying goodbye to you." My chest tightened. I held his hand. "Then don't." He looked at me. "It's not that simple. I know. There are things I still want to do." "Then do them." He looked confused. "And if those things take you away from me?" I smiled. "Then we'll figure it out." He stared at me. "You really changed." I laughed. "I think I just finally understood that loving you doesn't mean asking you to give up your dreams." He squeezed my hand. "And loving you doesn't mean I have to choose between you and everything else I want." Exactly. We sat there quietly for a while, then Jimin smiled. "You know what? What? I think I want to stay." My heart stopped for a second. "Here?" He shook his head. "Not exactly." I looked at him confused. "Then where?" He smiled. "With you." I couldn't help laughing. "That's not a location, it is to me." I looked down because I didn't trust my face anymore. "You're really going to make me cry." He laughed. "You already are." I wiped my eyes. "Don't tell anyone. Too late." We stayed there until the room became quiet. Then Jimin leaned his head against my shoulder. I looked at him and thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the distance, the misunderstandings, the nights I had spent wondering whether I should tell him the truth. All of it had led us here. Not to a perfect ending, not to a promise that nothing would ever hurt again, but to something more valuable: honesty. We both understood that our lives would remain complicated. There would be schedules, distance, difficult decisions, and moments when fear returned. But now we knew how to face those things together. Before we left the room, Jimin stopped at the door. "JUNGKOOK?" "Yeah?" He smiled. "Do you still remember what you said that night?" "Which thing?" "That if I left, you'd miss me." I smiled. "I remember." "How much?" I looked at him. "More than I knew was possible." He smiled. "Good." Then he walked away. I followed him, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to stop a goodbye. I was thinking about how to build a life where goodbye didn't have to be the end. And maybe that's the part of this story I was trying to understand all along. I thought I had to choose between loving someone and letting them be free. I thought protecting my heart meant keeping my feelings hidden. I thought saying goodbye would save us from getting hurt. But I was wrong. The real thing I needed to say goodbye to was my fear. And once I finally did that, I realized Jimin had never been the person I needed to leave behind. He was the person I needed to be brave enough to walk beside. After everything that happened, I thought the hardest part would be getting Jimin back into my life. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to stop being afraid that I would lose him again. When you almost lose someone because of your own choices, you start questioning everything. Sometimes I would look at Jimin and wonder if things were really okay. Sometimes I'd catch myself watching his expression, trying to figure out whether he was happy or whether he was hiding something from me. And every time I noticed myself doing it, I had to remind myself that trust wasn't something you demanded from another person. It was something you built together. So I tried to stop asking questions that came from fear and started asking questions that came from care. How was your day? Did you eat? Are you tired? Is something bothering you? They sounded like simple questions, but they meant something different now because I was actually listening to the answers. Jimin noticed the change. One evening, we were sitting together after a long day, and he suddenly said, "You're different now." I smiled. "You already said that." "I know. Then why do you keep saying it?" He looked at me. "Because I like this version of you." I laughed. What was wrong with the old version? He was terrible at communicating. I laughed so hard that he started laughing too. but then he became serious. You know what I was most afraid of? I shook my head. That one day you'd realize you didn't actually love me, that maybe you just hated the idea of losing me. I thought about that carefully. I understand why you thought that. Do you? Yeah. I took his hand. But I know the difference now. He looked at me. How? Because even when you had the chance to leave, I wanted you to choose what made you happy. Even when it scared me, I wanted you to follow your dreams. I didn't want you to stay because you were afraid of losing me. Jimin was quiet. That's when I knew it was real. I smiled. I think I learned that the hard way. Sometimes we do. Our relationship didn't suddenly become perfect after that. We still had disagreements. Sometimes we'd misunderstand each other. Sometimes one of us would become quiet because we were tired. But there was one thing we never did again. We never used silence as a weapon. If something hurt, we talked about it. If one of us needed space, we said so. If we missed each other, we didn't pretend we didn't. It sounds simple, but for us it changed everything. I also started noticing how much Jimin had changed. He became more comfortable telling me when he was worried. He stopped pretending he was okay when he wasn't. He started asking me for help instead of trying to handle everything alone. And I realized that love wasn't only about the moments when everything felt good. It was also about being there when someone wasn't okay. One night, Jimin came to me looking exhausted. He sat down beside me and didn't say anything. I waited. After a few minutes, he finally whispered, "I'm tired." I looked at him. "Then rest." He shook his head. I'm tired of always having to be strong." I didn't know what to say, so I simply stayed beside him. He leaned against my shoulder. I didn't try to fix anything. I didn't give him advice. I just stayed. After a while, he said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking me to explain." I smiled. "You don't always have to explain." He closed his eyes. I wish I'd known that before. I looked at him and thought about how many times I had tried to find the perfect words when what he really needed was someone willing to stay. Maybe I had misunderstood love from the beginning. I thought love was about saying the right things at the right time. But sometimes it was simply being there when there were no right words. Months later, we went back to the small room with the photographs. Some of the pictures had changed. There were new ones now, new memories, new places, new little moments that neither of us had planned. Jimin stood in front of the wall and smiled. "Look how much happened." I walked beside him. "Yeah. Do you remember the first picture?" "Of course." "You look so serious." I laughed. "I was probably pretending not to notice you." He looked at me. "You were terrible at pretending." "I know." We stood there quietly. Then he asked, "If you could go back to the beginning, would you change anything?" I thought about it for a long time. There were plenty of things I could have changed. I could have been honest earlier. I could have asked instead of assuming. I could have stopped myself from pushing him away. But eventually, I shook my head. "No." He looked surprised. "Really?" "Yeah. Even all the mistakes, especially the mistakes." He smiled. "Why?" I looked at him. "Because those mistakes taught me how important honesty is. If I hadn't been afraid of losing you, maybe I wouldn't have understood how much I was taking our time together for granted." He nodded slowly. "That's true." I took the old note from my wallet. It was worn now from being carried around for so long. I showed it to him. "You know, this changed my life." He laughed. "It's just one sentence." "Not to me." I looked at the words again. "I was waiting for you to stop being afraid. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in my wallet." "I think I'll keep this forever." Jimin smiled. "Good." We walked out together. It was getting late, and the street was quiet. I looked at him beside me and realized something I hadn't understood when this story began. I thought the hardest thing I would ever have to do was say goodbye to Jimin. But saying goodbye was never really the point. The real challenge was learning to love someone without letting fear make my decisions. I had to say goodbye to the version of myself that ran away whenever something mattered too much. I had to say goodbye to the idea that silence could protect me. And I had to say goodbye to the belief that losing someone was inevitable just because I loved them. I don't know what the future will look like. I can't promise that we'll never face distance again. I can't promise that every decision will be easy. But I can promise myself one thing. If I ever become afraid again, I'll talk. If I miss him, I'll say it. If something hurts, I'll be honest. And if life ever puts us at another crossroads, I won't make the choice for him. I'll stand beside him and ask what he wants. Because that's what I finally learned. Love isn't about holding someone so tightly that they can't leave. It's about giving them the freedom to choose, and trusting that if they choose to stay, they're staying because they truly want to. Jimin once asked me if I would miss him. I told him yes. I didn't know then just how much that answer would mean. Now, if he asked me the same question, I wouldn't just say I'd miss him. I'd tell him that he became part of the way I understand happiness, fear, courage, and home. And maybe that's why I had to say goodbye to him once. Not because I wanted him gone, but because I needed to learn that love was never supposed to be about fear. It was supposed to be about courage. I thought I had already told Jimin everything. I thought there were no more secrets left between us, no more words hiding somewhere inside my heart, waiting for the right moment. But one evening, while we were sitting together and talking about everything that had happened, I realized there was still one thing I had never properly explained. Not because I was hiding it from him, but because I had never known how to put it into words. I looked at him and said, "Can I tell you something?" He smiled. "You always say that before saying something serious." I laughed. "Maybe because I'm still nervous. You don't have to be nervous with me anymore." I looked down for a moment. "I know, but some things are still hard to say." He waited patiently. I took a breath. "When I first thought I had to say goodbye to you, I believed I was losing you because you were leaving." Jimin nodded. "But that's not what was really happening." He looked at me. "Then what was happening?" I smiled sadly. "I was losing you because I wasn't brave enough to let you know where you stood in my heart." He stayed quiet. I kept thinking that if I said nothing, I could keep our friendship safe. If I didn't tell you how I felt, then I wouldn't have to face rejection. If I acted like I didn't care, then maybe losing you wouldn't hurt as much. I paused, but every time I tried to protect myself, I ended up hurting you instead. Jimin looked down at his hands. "You weren't the only one who made mistakes." "I know. I was scared too. I know that now." He smiled faintly. "Good." I looked at him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had never talked that night?" He thought about it. "Sometimes." "What do you think would have happened?" He shrugged. "Maybe we would have slowly become strangers." That answer made my chest tighten. I don't want to think about that. Me neither. We sat quietly for a while. Then Jimin said, "But maybe that's why I'm grateful." "For what?" "For the fact that we were both scared and still somehow found the courage to talk." I smiled. "It took us long enough." He laughed. "Way too long." We both laughed, and for a moment, everything felt easy. No fear, no uncertainty. Just us. I think that's what I had been looking for all along. Not a perfect relationship. Not a life without difficult moments. Just the feeling that I could sit beside someone and be completely honest without wondering whether the truth would make them disappear. There was another thing I had learned during the time we spent apart. Missing someone doesn't always mean you should chase them. Sometimes it means you understand how much they matter while still respecting the life they're building. I had spent so much time thinking that love meant keeping someone close that I forgot love could also mean standing back and letting them become who they wanted to be. Jimin taught me that without ever giving me a lecture. He simply lived his life, made his choices, and trusted me enough to tell me the truth, and I wanted to give him the same freedom. "Jimin," I said quietly. "What?" "If someday you have to leave again, I want you to go." He looked at me carefully. "You mean that?" "Yes." "Even if it hurts?" I nodded. "Even if it hurts." He was silent. "And if I ask you to come with me?" I laughed. "Then we'll talk about it." He smiled. "That's your answer?" "Yeah, you used to panic over everything, I know. Now you just say we'll talk about it." "I'm improving." He laughed. Then he leaned against my shoulder, and I rested my head gently against his. Neither of us said anything for a while. Outside, people were moving through the street, cars were passing, and somewhere nearby, music was playing softly. It was an ordinary evening. And maybe that's what made it special. Nothing dramatic was happening. Nobody was leaving. Nobody was crying. Nobody was afraid. We were simply together. And after everything, I realized those ordinary moments were the ones I wanted most. I didn't need a perfect ending. I didn't need some huge promise that would guarantee our future. I just wanted more ordinary days, more conversations that lasted too long, more messages asking if the other person had eaten, more arguments about what movie to watch, more coffee that got cold because we were talking, more moments when one of us said something stupid and the other couldn't stop laughing, more memories that looked insignificant at the time but became important later. That's what I wanted. A life made of small moments with someone who mattered. Jimin suddenly looked at me and asked, "Are you thinking too much again?" I laughed. Probably. About what? I looked at him. You. He smiled. That's dangerous. I know. What were you thinking? I hesitated. Then I decided not to hesitate anymore. That I'm grateful you stayed. He looked at me for a moment. I didn't stay because you asked me to. I know. I stayed because I wanted to. I smiled. That's exactly why it means so much. He reached for my hand, then stopped worrying about it. I squeezed his hand. I'm trying. He smiled. Keep trying. And I think that's the simplest way I can explain everything that happened. I didn't become fearless. I just stopped letting fear make every decision for me. I still worry sometimes. I still overthink. I still wonder whether I'm saying the right thing. But now, when I'm afraid, I look at Jimin and remember that honesty is always better than silence. I remember the night he thought I wanted him to leave. I remember the message saying goodbye would be easier. I remember how badly I wanted to take back every careless word I'd said. And then I remember the note he gave me. I was waiting for you to stop being afraid. Maybe that was the real goodbye in this story. I wasn't saying goodbye to Jimin. I was saying goodbye to the version of myself that was too afraid to love honestly. I was saying goodbye to the habit of hiding behind silence. I was saying goodbye to the idea that protecting my heart was more important than telling someone how much they meant to me. And if I could go back to the beginning, knowing everything I know now, I think I would still be nervous. I would still be scared. But maybe I'd look at Jimin a little longer. Maybe I'd ask one more question. Maybe I'd stay 5 more minutes. And maybe, just maybe, I'd tell him the truth before I had to learn what it felt like to lose him. Because sometimes the person you are most afraid of losing is also the person who teaches you how to stop running. And for me, that person was Jimin. Looking back now, I think I finally understand why this story began with goodbye. It wasn't really about Jimin leaving. It wasn't really about distance, missed calls, misunderstandings, or the fear that one day we might wake up and realize our lives had moved in different directions. The goodbye I was afraid of was much deeper than that. I was afraid of saying goodbye to the person I thought I had to be, the person who kept everything inside, the person who believed that being strong meant never admitting he was scared, the person who thought protecting someone meant making decisions for them. I spent so much time trying to control what might happen that I almost lost something beautiful before it even had the chance to become real. And honestly, if you're listening to this and you've ever been in a situation where you loved someone but were too afraid to say it, maybe you understand what I mean. Sometimes we think silence is safer. We think if we don't say what we feel, we can't be rejected. We think if we keep our expectations low, losing someone won't hurt as much. But I learned that silence has its own kind of pain. It can make someone you love believe they don't matter to you. It can turn a simple misunderstanding into distance. It can make two people who care about each other stand on opposite sides of the same problem, both waiting for the other person to speak first. That's what happened to Jimin and me. We weren't separated because we didn't care. We were separated because we cared so much that we were both afraid of what the truth might change. And when I finally told him the truth, I realized something I should have understood much earlier. Love doesn't guarantee that things will be easy. It doesn't guarantee that someone will stay forever. It doesn't guarantee that distance won't hurt or that misunderstandings won't happen again. But love gives you a reason to be honest. It gives you a reason to stop pretending. It gives you the courage to say, "This is how I feel," even when your voice shakes. And that's what I finally learned to do. I told Jimin I loved him. I told him I was scared. I told him I didn't want to lose him. I told him that his happiness mattered to me, even when his happiness meant accepting that he might have to go somewhere without me. And he told me his truth too. He told me that he had been afraid. He told me that my silence had hurt him. He told me that he had feelings for me long before either of us had the courage to admit them. None of that erased our mistakes, but it gave those mistakes meaning. We learned from them. We became more honest because of them. We became better at listening because we understood what could happen when we didn't. And maybe that's what real love is supposed to teach us. Not how to avoid pain, but how to face it without running away. Today, when I think about the day Jimin left, I don't remember the sadness as much as I remember what happened afterward. I remember the message I sent him. I already miss you. I remember his reply, "Good, now you know how I felt." I remember laughing alone because even when we were apart, he somehow knew how to make me smile. I remember the little room with the photographs. I remember the notes. I remember the bracelet. I remember the conversations that lasted longer than they needed to. I remember the moments when neither of us said anything because we didn't need to. And most importantly, I remember the feeling of finally knowing where we stood. There was no guessing anymore, no pretending, no wondering whether I mattered. I knew. He knew. And sometimes that certainty is more valuable than any promise. I also learned that saying goodbye doesn't always mean ending something. Sometimes goodbye means letting go of fear. Sometimes it means leaving behind the version of yourself that no longer fits the life you're trying to build. Sometimes it means accepting that someone can leave a room, a city, or even a chapter of your life without leaving your heart. And sometimes, if you're lucky, goodbye becomes a reminder to appreciate the next hello. That's what Jimin became for me. Every time I see him again after being apart, I appreciate the moment more. I don't assume he'll always be there. I don't assume we'll always have the same amount of time together. I don't take the small things for granted anymore. If I want to talk to him, I call. If I miss him, I say it. If something bothers me, I tell him. If he's happy, I celebrate with him. If he's struggling, I stay beside him. It sounds simple. Maybe it is. But sometimes the simplest things are the hardest lessons to learn. I used to think I had to protect my heart from love. Now I think the better choice is to protect love from my fear. Those are two very different things. And if I could give my younger self one piece of advice, I wouldn't tell him to be fearless. I'd tell him to be honest while he's afraid. I'd tell him that it's okay if your hands shake when you tell someone how you feel. It's okay if you don't know what happens next. It's okay if you can't guarantee the future. You don't need to know the ending before you start telling the truth. Sometimes you just need to take the first step. That's what I wish I had done sooner. I wish I had looked at Jimin and said, "I'm scared because you matter to me." Maybe everything would have been easier. Maybe it wouldn't. We'll never know. But I know one thing. I don't regret telling him the truth. And I don't regret learning how to let him choose his own path. Because if someone stays only because you're afraid to let them go, that's not love. But if someone has the freedom to leave and still chooses to come back, that's something you can trust. So, when you hear the title of this story, I have to say goodbye to Jimin. I hope you understand what it really means now. I wasn't saying goodbye because I stopped loving him. I wasn't saying goodbye because I wanted him out of my life. I wasn't saying goodbye because our story had ended. I had to say goodbye to my fear. I had to say goodbye to silence. I had to say goodbye to the part of me that believed love was something I needed to hide in order to keep it safe. And once I finally let that version of myself go, I could finally stand beside Jimin without pretending. I could finally look at him and say what I should have said from the beginning. You matter to me, not because I needed him to stay, not because I wanted to control what happened next, just because it was true. And sometimes, the truth is the most romantic thing you can give someone. So if you're listening to me right now, and there's someone you care about, someone you've been thinking about, someone whose name appears on your phone and makes you hesitate before sending a message, maybe don't wait forever. I'm not saying you have to make a huge confession tonight. I'm just saying that sometimes one honest sentence can prevent years of wondering. Tell them you care. Tell them you miss them. Tell them they're important. And if you're afraid, that's okay. I was afraid too. I just wish I had realized sooner that courage doesn't mean you're not scared. Courage means you speak even when you are. For me, that was the real meaning behind saying goodbye to Jimin. I didn't lose him. I found the courage to stop hiding from what I felt. And maybe that's why, after everything we went through, goodbye no longer feels like the end. It feels like a reminder that every hello matters. Every conversation matters. Every ordinary moment matters. And every person we love deserves to know that they matter while we still have the chance to tell them. If my story touched your heart, tell me where you're listening from, and I'll see you in the next story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next emotional story. And if you've ever had someone you cared about, but were too afraid to tell them how you felt, share your story in the comments below. I'd really love to know where you're listening from and what this story made you feel. Thank you for staying with me until the end, and I'll see you in the next story.